and it's now my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Flavia Schlegel, who's the Special Envoy for Science in Global Policy, who will be delivering a keynote talk on science at risk, risking more than science. Dr. Schlegel has held positions including as a science diplomat in the USA and China, as UNESCO's Assistant Director for Natural Sciences, and as Vice Director at the Swiss Federal Office for Public Health. So over to you.
Thank you, Robin. And with over 80 million, the world is currently witnessing the highest numbers of forcibly displaced people on record. We don't really know the exact numbers of how many scientists are forcibly displaced, but every one of them is one too many. But what we do know is that during the last 2 years, the pandemic has immensely added to the burden of displaced people and to those who support them. In all these difficult circumstances, this symposium showcasing the work of Syrian scientists seems like a beacon of hope and a step forward. And it is really a great honor and pleasure for me to be part of it. I'd like to thank you, Robin, Professor Grimes, for your kind introduction, and to the Cara team, to the British Academy and the Royal Society for bringing me on board and for bringing all of us together today. And also many thanks to the technical team and to the translation. You are instrumental for our mutual understanding. And to you all, dear participants, I wish you good morning, good afternoon, or evening, hoping that you all are in a safe place and well. The title of my talk for this opening segment of today's symposium is Science at Risk, Risking More Than Science. And let me just quickly clarify that my definition of science includes all scientific disciplines, the natural, the technical, the social, engineering, and the humanities. We need all of that knowledge. Why did I choose this title? Well, during my professional career over the last 20 years in international science cooperation, as a science diplomat or a science broker, I was confronted with different situations of risk. In the US, for example, after 9/11, when the country closed its borders to scientists with the wrong names or the wrong nationalities. In China, where social scientists, out of fear of repercussions, had to carefully navigate issues such as democracy. Or at UNESCO, where we monitored the situation of scientists worldwide. Or at the International Science Council, which Robin has already mentioned, supporting the freedom of scientists to express their views and the evolving knowledge regarding the pandemic. Personally, I'm deeply convinced that the respect for and the support to academic freedom and critical thinking are very strong indicators for the well-being and the resilience of a society, and the take of that society on equity and justice. And I do consider science as a global public good. You're also relating today's symposium on SDGs, and the framework of the UN 2030 Agenda and the SDGs have been guiding my work over the last few years. The world community highlighted science, technology, and innovation as key success factors for sustainable development, integrating for the first time social, economic, and ecological issues in one agenda. But if science is instrumental, so is the recognition and the protection of freedom of science and scientific researchers, as documented as well in UNESCO's recommendations of 2017. But it seems very difficult to implement and monitor the status of these recommendations. Why? Geopolitics pose great threats to academic freedom of people and institutions. And as Robin has already mentioned, Cara, since its origins in the 1930s, and other organizations such as the Scholar Rescue Fund or the Scholar at Risk Programme, have faced many waves of threats to the specific countries and regions, be it from 2011 on now in Syria, to the latest conflicts in Myanmar, in Belarus, or the current tragedy in Afghanistan. Regarding scholars at risk, just allow me to briefly highlight tomorrow's launch of the latest report, Free to Think 2021. And I think together with the publication by the International Science Council to be released shortly as well, I think we have a great update on the status of scholars around the world, because it is very important to monitor the situation and to talk about it. And on top of geopolitics, a devastating pandemic traps people in places where they should not be, excludes them from places where they should be able to go. Travel and visa rules and regulations change suddenly and unexpectedly, and the pandemic leaves science as a whole at a very critical juncture, because what the scientists say is not always comfortable or easy facts for politicians. So science at risk does not only risk the science community and knowledge production. Ultimately, it risks the development of resilient and equitable society. And it is, for many of you, a very direct threat also to your families or to your colleagues' lives. But let me not become too gloomy. During these days, you cover some of these topics with much more expertise than I ever could. And as I mentioned right in the beginning, this symposium is first and foremost a celebration and a showcase of the achievement of Syrian scientists. Showcasing, presenting, and sharing are key objectives of this week's symposium, and certainly also key steps in response to today's topic, operationalizing research to help rebuild Syria's infrastructure. There are different aspects on how to operationalize research. But to me, it seems that all aspects are closely linked to the nature of the academic system itself, to politics, and to money. Let me briefly mention only two aspects. First, sharing and debating. The possibility to share and debate one's findings is absolutely essential, because it creates access to fellow scientists, to literature, to professional development, but also to exposure and to publications. And as important as sharing and debating are, is also the recognition that creating impact is always context specific. Or in other words, research needs to include and practice representing the local context. Therefore, in my opinion, including Syrian scientists in science and challenges related to Syria is not a nice to have. It is not an act of charity, but it is a sign of excellence and a success factors towards impact. It is a shared responsibility of members of academia. But this academic system has already been quite challenged by the SDGs. There is a call for more sustainability sciences, for more inter- and transdisciplinary approaches, inclusion of gender aspects, and the very old call to have more women scientists participate. Issues such as open science or FAIR principle for data, right now the hottest global commodity of our time, question the current system in many ways. To respond to these challenges, academic success has to develop other criteria than just citation index or publication rate. Norms and standards of the current science practice have always been dominated by approaches of the Western or Northern Hemisphere. There's no doubt that displaced scientists have to adapt to the host country or region. Don't take me wrong, as I mentioned earlier, context matters. But academic standards should respect and reflect the specific situations, needs, and limiting factors of displaced scientists regarding language, career, or skills development. Academic standards should level the playing field for scientists from different cultural and social backgrounds, and in particular for scientists at risk. The number of scientists at risk is increasing, and scientific freedom is under attack from many fronts. As Robin has already mentioned, there is no easy way out. To act and to support are not only a moral obligation, but it will improve the performance of the global science system, and it will safeguard skills already developed, and it provides young and early career scientists with a positive perspective and outlook. And in this regard, I would like to acknowledge the Global Young Academy and their new program offering mentorship to displaced young scientists. But academia always takes place in a social and political circumstances. And I mentioned the role of politics and money when it comes to operationalizing research. Let's look at politics. Rebuilding efforts around the globe show that without the support of communities credibly representing a country or a region, and without some kind of functioning governance structure, it will be very difficult to achieve sustainable results. It does require an internationally agreed plan informed by science, which respects national sovereignty, which includes checks and balances, safeguards or progress made, and commitment to sufficient funding. Science alone will not succeed. It will require a great deal of political will, regionally and internationally. And the symposium now offers the chance to policymakers to learn from Syrian scientists what they think about these issues, specifically in relation to SDGs 7 and 9. So today's sessions does mark a real step forward. As the symposium showcases results and reflections to policymakers, to fellow scientists, it also showcases to funders. And this leads me to money, or if I say it a little bit more diplomatically, to the issue of funding. Competition for funding had been strong already before the pandemic, for health, for climate, for biodiversity, food security, digital transformation, and so on. And obviously, it's become even greater now. The funding landscape is complex and not easy to decipher. Impossible for displaced scientists who are not familiar with the host country system and who have to struggle for basic needs, which sets them at disadvantage in comparison to their competitors. This is a call to funding agencies to fund services provided by Cara and similar institutions for displaced scientists, and to provide sufficient and long-term funding. The same could be asked from academic institutions in countries which can be considered safe havens. Why not dedicate 1% of annual budgets? Rebuilding science for Syria and rebuilding Syria requires many ingredients. Science and Syrian scientists are essential for both. And let me here briefly greet all the female scientists present. They face additional barriers just by the fact that they are women. And it's been a long-standing issue how we could globally increase the participation of women in the scientific enterprise. Cara, the Royal Society, the British Academy, and others make a huge contribution in enabling and facilitating this exchange over this week's time. Their contribution cannot be overestimated. Many thanks again, and thanks as well to all volunteers and hosting institutions. And coming to the end of my input, I think if wishing were still possible, I would wish that maybe in 10 years' time, after a strong peace settlement had been reached for Syria, we would meet again and you all could report on how your science shaped the rebuilding of Syria and how you did save more than science for Syria. I wish you a fruitful day and thanks for listening.